This is the kind of video that I have been working so hard towards. I have spent the last several weeks testing all sorts of various motors, props, and everything I can get my hands on skinny frames, on heavy frames, on all sorts of various frames. And I'm going to present to you my findings, my conclusions based on all the testing that I have done. First and foremost, I have to tell you that this is my opinion, purely my opinion. It's a well-informed opinion, but it is my opinion. Please don't leave hate comments down below. You can believe whatever you want. Nothing I say is gospel. I'm not preaching to the choir or anything. I'm just giving you my research and my information and my opinion after doing all this testing. That being said, I've also discussed this with a number of other people, Brian Morris, Ryan Harrell, and Conrad, and they all kind of believe sort of the same thing. So here's my presentation of different motors, different props, different classes, and how to build. And another note, this is actually a prediction. I am actually not done testing all the various kinds of motors and all the various kinds of props on the different motors, and we also have a couple other motors coming that I have to test. And so this is going to be a prediction, which I'm pretty sure is going to be pretty accurate based on all the performance that I've already learned of on all these different motors. And in the near future, when we actually get all the products in, I will have an update video with an update piece of information about all these. Also, I'm going to be talking mainly about the Brother Hobby motors, because Brother Hobby just does a really good job of putting all the kind of best stuff into a motor, and it's really hard for other motor companies to actually even match their performance at the price point as well, just because they do a really good job building the motors, and they listen to the merchants that are actually buying the motors from them, and they'll design specific motors for the merchant. So before I even begin, I'll present to you with this motor. This is the 2204, the recent 2204 that PureFlip had made. It is a totally custom motor. It's based on a 16x16 mounting platform. And okay, so before I continue, I'm basing most of this information off Brother Hobby motors. I have tried a bunch of other motors, and some of the motors that I like very much are all the Brother Hobby motors are great. Except for their actual Tornado line or their own personal motors. Not so many of them, those are very good. The specialty motors that they make for various shops are very good, like the 2206, all the Hyperlight motors, and Multicopter Builders also makes a good 2207, and various other merchants have their own OEM rendition of the Brother Hobby motor. Emax is the second company that I would recommend. Actually, it wouldn't be the second place company, it's just another excellent motor, and they have their 2306, which is a fantastic motor, and it's the only motor that has a prop that's designed specifically for it, and the prop is one hell of a prop. It's an incredible prop. So this motor prop combination is fantastic, and nobody has even made a motor and then a prop to match the motor. So if you get these two, you know you are getting fantastic performance right off the bat. It's just a little heavy, so you'll have to deal with that. So you can definitely use other motors. I know the T-Motor F60 is also a great motor, although I personally don't really like T-Motors, their latest motors, because to me they don't feel that durable, but I haven't really crashed or broken any, so I don't know. But I know the F60 is a fantastic motor, and their other motors are fine. The F60 is actually a 2207. I have no idea why they use this ridiculous naming scheme. I wish they would change it and just give us just basic numbers, but who knows. I've told them that already, but they won't do it. They like their naming scheme. Let's move ahead with general predictions and discussion of the quad. So, the most important thing I'm going to tell you in this video is a thing that Brian Morris has actually known for a long time, and he actually told me, because he's like the godfather of all this stuff. The best weight for a 5-inch quad is 250 grams. This is a very special number. Brian Morris came up with it first. I came to the same conclusion, years after he did. And then Conrad recently came up with the same number, and we all independently came up with the same number. If you have a quad, a 5-inch quad that weighs a little bit less than 250 grams, you don't really get that much extra benefit in performance. But if you have a 5-inch quad that weighs a little bit more than 250 grams, you can definitely feel the extra weight. I'm not talking about with battery or anything. I'm talking about totally dry weight. Dry weight of 250 grams is your mark. If you're using a smaller motor, you want to go a little bit lighter. If you're using a heavier motor, you can tolerate a little bit more weight. The two classes of quad building that I'm going to be discussing is going to be primarily the lightweight setup and the acro setup, which I don't even have a sample of here. The acro setup is going to be like your general acro setup, So in acro, there's two different setups. One will be a general setup, which Mr. Steele uses, and Johnny Scher, and pretty much everybody else. And then the other kind of acro setup will be the Matty Stunts style acro setup, which is basically just a super light race setup with super high camera tilt. So those are your two main acro setups. And then for racing, lighter is always better. For racing, lighter is always better. I mean, if anybody tells you otherwise, they're just wrong. Lighter is always better for racing. And if it's too light, if you think it's too light, you can just load up more battery. So lighter is always better. Okay, let's get down into the motors. I have been testing the 2204 motor. This is the 2522 kV. Brian Morris, actually, this is the prototypes. Brian Morris has the 2722 kV, and let me tell you a little bit about the motor. It's a 2204 motor. It has the same exact build, construction, quality, and materials as the 2206 and 2207, all the Brother Hobby motors. Titanium shaft. It does not use a screw on the bottom. It uses a C-clip, and actually I'm going to hopefully have them switch that out to a traditional E-clip, because that clip is really hard to get on and off, and it just breaks if you get it off. And it does not have the railing around the bottom, because who needs that railing? It's not important. And bottom is totally clear, and you've probably seen people crack off their 2206 motors right here, right at the base, where the base connects to the stator. So what we've done is we have actually made that section thicker, and they thinned out the rest of it and took away the railing to compensate, and it actually ends up being a little bit lighter. It also has a 16x16 hole mounting platform, so it's much easier to mount and much easier to manage. You don't really, I underestimated how convenient it would be to have a 16x16 mounting solution. It is much more convenient than the 16x19 mount, which was shockingly inconvenient. Also, the best thing about this bottom is that look how much space you have between the stator and the bottom of the bell, or the bottom of the bell house of the motor housing. I never worry about hitting my windings anymore, because I can straight up just look and see where the screw is. So I never have to worry about that at all. It's this prototype is in 6065 aluminum. I know the final one is probably going to be in 7075 titanium shaft. I want them to make the titanium shaft like maybe 2 millimeters longer, so it'll fit a prop with a prop washer on top, because that kind of prevents your prop from loosening when you hit stuff. And that's about this motor. It is a 20-gram motor. Right now we are testing 3 different speeds: the 2522, 2722, and the 3022 kV speeds. So far, the 2522 is great. I find that it's best on the 5x4x3 prop, and the Brian Morris is running the 2722 on the DAL 5x4 5x3, the skinny blade 4.5 prop, and he has clocked it at 93 miles per hour, and it definitely goes much quicker than my quad. My quad here is, I think, 230 grams dry, and Brian Morris's is 212 grams. So he definitely has a little bit of a weight advantage. But this motor in general, I'm going to start with this motor for my discussion. This motor is a very specialty motor. You really have to kind of know what you're doing. You basically just cannot go over 240 grams dry. Even 240 is a little bit heavy for this motor. If you keep it at around 230 to 240 grams dry with this motor, you're going to be good. And when you are using this motor, you have to really choose your prop very, very carefully. You have to choose the prop first and then build the quad to the prop. If you want to use the 5x4x3, you can run the 2722 kV, and I don't think you can run. I think the 3000 kV is just too high for 5-inch. You're gonna have to. That's a 4-inch motor. So for the 2522 kV, it'll run both the 5x4x3 skinny blade by Dahl, and also the 5x4x3. It will give you about 1:45 to 2 minutes on these with I think a 1000 pack. Brian Morris is getting 1.5 minutes on, I think, a 1000 pack on the 2722 with the skinny blade 4.5 pitch prop. This motor does not have enough torque to run props like the Emax, the new Emax prop, or the 5152. Just doesn't have the torque. Don't even try. I mean, you can try, and actually I personally prefer this prop on this motor just because the Emax prop just feels so good in there. This is like the Jesus prop. It's so amazing. I really hope that they come out very soon. I have not broken one yet. This one has gotten scuffed, so I have to like hold off flying it too much. Okay, so that's this motor. Great motor. If you know what you're doing, it's a very specific motor. You really got to know what you're doing. One other thing, I'm talking about Brother Hobby Motors and Emax Motors. Mini Quad Test Bench is a fantastic source for motor tests, for bench tests. You can pretty much use all the metrics and information on that site to find a motor that matches the torque curve of the motors that I'm discussing. I personally stick to Brother Hobby Motors because they're plentiful around me and they just work great. It's a really good benchmark standard motor, but you can use whatever motor you want. Just because a motor says it's a 2207 doesn't mean it has a lot of torque. There's a lot of 2208 motors that have very little torque and perform like a 2205 motor from recent times. So be careful what motor you're choosing. Definitely use Mini Quad Test Bench. Definitely look up the torque curve and see what you're getting. And the reason I say that is important is because the Emax prop and the 5152 require torque. They require a lot of torque. This prop was designed for a very torquey motor. The Emax 2306 is a very, very torquey motor. All right, let's continue the motor discussion. So the 2204, super light setup, 240 grams, max dry weight. Next level up, if you're running a Connex setup or something that's a little bit heavier, do not go below a 2205 motor. I don't even have the motor here, but do not go below the 2205 motor. And also one other thing, by the way, I think that 2300 kV is just too slow. Don't bother with 2300 kV. Don't get any motor less than 2400 kV. It's just disappointing when you fly it and it just doesn't move that fast. You're just kind of pegged at max throttle. So 2300, even on a really aggressive fast prop like the Emax prop, is just too slow. Don't get it. So medium setups, generally 260 grams is the max limit for the 2205 motor. 260, 270 grams. Really 260. 260 grams is the max limit for the 2205 motor. This motor is 20 grams, the 2204 is 20 grams, I think the 2205 is 24 grams, and that's going to be the max limit for excellent performance. And if you're running an acro setup, keep it light with that motor. If you're running a race setup, keep it light with that motor. If you're running Connex, that motor will support it. That is also the smallest motor that will support the Emax prop and the 5152. You will not be getting optimal performance from these props from that small of a motor, but it will run the prop properly without giving you weird wobbles because it can't manage the prop because it doesn't have the torque. Next step up is the 2206. The 2206 motor is going to give you a different class of performance than the 2204 and the 2205. This is really a benchmark class motor. If you're running a Matty Stunts style setup where you need to have very lightweight, very high power, and you're considering 5S or even 6S, the 2206 motor is a great option, especially in 25-22 kV. It's a very good number, and it will run 5S with either the Emax or the 5152 prop very well. This is the smallest motor that I would recommend running the Emax or the 5152 prop on. It's the smallest motor that actually has the torque to manage the prop properly without wobbles and weird torque issues. If you're running this motor, I say still stay to the 260 gram. If you can get it to 250 grams, you're going to have fantastic performance. This is an okay acro motor as well. By acro, I mean the regular acro setup, which is typically a little bit more heavy, up to around 280 grams. When you're passing 280 grams with this motor, you're really just losing performance. It's just not that nice. So I wouldn't recommend it. If you're running the 27-22 kV version of this motor, your prop choices change a lot. We really do have a shortage of props. If you're running that high up kV, you kind of have to go with a twin blade prop because we don't have any other options. And if you can run the 5x4x3, but it's generally just a slow blade. You want to have a 4/5 pitch if you want to move quickly. So there's that dilemma. Also, at this motor class, a 2206 on a super skinny frame like this frame that I have here, or generally any frame under 50 grams, that is going to be an advanced setup. I recommend only at least intermediate to advanced pilots run a 2206 motor on a light frame setup because you're putting a good amount of weight. This is a 28 gram motor, plus the prop weight is another 5 point something grams, plus the prop nut, which is another 0.2 of a gram. You're putting a lot of weight at the end of the arm, and in a crash, that is going to impact how the frame will support the crash, will actually take the impact. So you will break things if you're running a 2206 motor on a super skinny frame. That being said, if you are an intermediate or advanced pilot, you don't really crash hard anymore. I have not broken a frame arm, even doing my crazy backwards moves, in a long time. It's been at least 4 months, 5 months since I've broken any frame. I've only really scuffed corners. So At this point, I'm going to say that the discussion becomes relatively advanced. This is still not my choice motor. Of course, I don't do a lot of racing, and generally between the 2206 and the 2204, you're going to get a much more agile craft with the 2204 motor if you build it correctly. The 2206 will have a lot of punch, but it's not going to be quite the same agility because it's heavier. It's just heavier. You just have to deal with that extra inertia, so it's not going to be the same. All right, now we get to kind of my idea of the gold standard. My gold standard motor is the Emax 2306 or the Brother Hobby 2207 or the T-Motor F60. These are, the Emax is a 2306, and then the other ones are 2207 motors. This 2306 is 2400 kV, and I think it's actually around 2400 kV. It has been designed for the Emax prop, which is phenomenal. They're together, they're a phenomenal combination. They're not super high amp draw, and they're pretty damn quick. So it's a very good combination. And the 2207 from Brother Hobby is 3.5 grams lighter, I think, per motor. We have a very special version of the 2207 coming, similar to this motor, and I'm very much looking forward to that. So my gold standard for general motors is going to be that 2207 in a 2500 kV. Around that, we're getting a very special number. We're building a very special motor in that general class. But again, I say my star, my benchmark motor, my gold star motor is the 2207 or the Emax 2306. These motors, if you get them and you run either the 5152 or the Gem Fan prop, you're going to have absolutely stellar performance as long as you keep your weight under 270 grams, 270, 275 grams. For racing, for a light setup, the lighter is better. Lighter is just better always, but the reason I say in this case lighter is better is because when you crash, you're going to have a lot of weight at the end of the arms, and you are going to break things. So you really want to keep it as light as possible to reduce the amount of inertia as possible. That being said, if you're running a acrobatic setup, not a Matty Stunts acrobatic setup, again I recommend a 2206 for the Matty Stunts style acrobatic setup because it's a lighter motor and it gives you the right kind of performance for what he does. But if you're running a general acro setup, like on this frame, well, I'll talk about this frame in a minute, a general acro setup where you're pushing a 280 to 300 gram quad, only use a 2207. Don't use anything else. It's just not even worth your time. Yes, anything else will work, but if you want excellent performance, you want to use a 2207, one of these good 2207, not just a random weird racer star or some other random brand 2207. You want to have a very good 2207. My idea of excellent performance for a acro setup, a normal acro setup, not a Matty Stunts acro setup, is going to be the ability to stop absolutely dead from any kind of a dive. It doesn't matter how hard it is, doesn't matter how fast you're dropping. I want to be able to level up, blip the throttle, and stop immediately. That is very important to me and allows me to do things that I would not be able to do otherwise. So if you're running an acrobatic setup, I highly, highly, highly recommend the Emax 2306 or the General Brother Hobby 2207 with the Emax prop, because this prop is just an amazing prop, but that's not available yet, so the 5152. Those are my general recommendations overall. There's also one other class that I did not discuss. It's the 4-inch class. When I first built this 4-inch quad, I thought it was wicked fast and crazy, but then I built my 5-inch light setup, and it makes this thing look like a toy. That being said, I think the Brother Hobby 1407 motor is probably the best motor in the class that you can get. We do have a lower kV version of it coming. I'm sure it'll be fine for 4-inch. I personally just don't like 4-inch, and I don't like 3-inch, so I'm going to keep this one around because I'll need it someday, I'm sure, for some 4-inch race of some sort. But yeah, 4-inch and 3-inch are just not for me. Yes, Emax sent me these motors for free, and I graciously thank them immensely for them, as well as this prop. But I'm not telling you any information that I wouldn't have said otherwise if I bought the stuff myself. I think that the best choice motors that we have today are really the Emax motor and the Brother Hobby 2207 motors. The 2207 motor that we are getting should be about 29 grams, maybe just under 29 grams, which is just a little bit more than 1 gram more than the 2206. And it's going to give you a lot more power, and it's not the power you're looking for, it's the torque. Torque is what gives you good control. When you're running a big beefy prop like this, you need to have that torque to be able to manage the prop and give you that feeling in the air of having fantastic control. Very, very important to have the right torque. What I found out when I was running these tiny little motors on 5-inch was that I didn't have the torque, so it was such a hard craft to fly because I couldn't get good control. I was constantly fighting for control because the motor just didn't have the torque to manage the big prop. Didn't matter how small of a 5-inch prop I was putting on it, it was just too long of a torque lever for the motor to manage. On a 40x45 like this prop is, this motor does a fantastic job, and I think this prop is really the best prop for that motor. The last thing that I forgot to talk about is this frame. If you're running a chunky frame like this, which is the Evo frame, which honestly I don't even look at anymore. I took apart, this is the only Evo frame I have left. I only use it for prop testing because it's just so slow, and I'm going to take it apart and put it on a skinny frame also. I'm not going to run these chunky frames anymore. I don't really crash enough to justify it, and if I do crash one of my skinny frames, it's so easy to replace an arm that I don't care. So I'm not running those chunky frames anymore. I think the light setups are way, way, way better for acrobatics as well as racing. One note for acrobatics, if you're running a slightly heavier setup like a 550 to 600 gram all-up weight, you will have the ability to move a little bit quicker with less tilt, and that's because the thing is heavier and it just wafts around, it slides around in the air easier than something that is much lighter and it needs to kind of like cut through the air to move. That being said, this prop feels like you're walking through the air. It feels like you're actually stepping in the air. It does not feel like it's just generating thrust and pushing you around. That's why it's so awesome. The control between the 5152 to the Emax prop is significant. You have significantly more control on the Emax prop. You guys seem to like the technical information and all of this just thrown at you directly, so I'm trying this again. It's another long video. I know it's at the end I'm saying this. Sorry for the long video, but it seems like you guys really want all the technical information right now and as fast as you can. So that's all I have today. Thanks for watching. Please floss. When I have time, I'll make more videos, and check out what Horizon sent me. Awesome. Before I was using Sergio's torrent, but now I have my own. So I hope to make some awesome videos. Also, they sent me the one with a new lens on it. So that's actually a 90-degree lens, which who knows what the actual degree is. But it's going to be not as crazy wide angle as the original lens was that I was using.